Welcome to the OIS podcast. Today, we're joined by 2/3 of OcuTerra's executive team, CEO Kerrie Brady and CMO Dr. David Tanzer. Let's listen in as Dr. Paul Karpecki speaks with them about OcuTerra's promising drop for diabetic retinopathy, the story behind the product, and how both of them transitioned from careers in medicine to careers in industry. Over to you, Paul.
Hello, and welcome to the OIS podcast. I'm Dr. Paul Karpecki. I practice in Lexington, Kentucky, and I'm honored to get to provide these podcasts through OIS. And today I'm really excited about having a couple guests with us, which I love that variety. And we're going to get to know this company, OcuTerra, very well, but also get to know Dr. Tanzer, Brady, as we go through understanding. So we're lucky today to have both the CMO and the CEO with us from OcuTerra. So first of all, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Paul. It's a delight to be here.
Pleasure, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So let's start by getting to know you a little bit for our listeners. And we have a great group of listeners, obviously industry people and companies. We also have obviously investors, ophthalmologists, optometrists, quite a variety of the industry. And it's always exciting when we are introducing kind of a newer company. And of course, I'm thrilled by this, a topical agent that could play a role in diabetic retinopathy and DME. But before we get to that, can you tell me, first of all, let's start with Kerrie, a little bit about your personal background, your professional path into this field of ophthalmology.
Sure, I'm delighted to. And to say that I'm new to ophthalmology. Worked in many different therapeutic areas during my nearly 40 years career in the industry here. I actually started out as a pharmacist in the industry. Worked in big pharma for a while, and then the majority of my career has been on the biotech side for the last 10 plus years, an unrepentant entrepreneur. And I say that with great glee because it's a path and a passion to be able to translate really exciting, important scientific advances and bring everything that's needed to bring them together for new treatments for patients with that. So a mixed background, new to ophthalmology, but not new to the business.
Excellent. That is a great background. And obviously that pharmaceutical background is great, but I loved how you chased your passion into these serial entrepreneur route. And I want to get into that a little later too, because a lot of listeners are in that realm where they may have ideas. This may be kind of what they're feeling and want to know how to get into that. But sure. Dr. Tanzer, I had the pleasure of getting to know you for a long time now, well over a decade plus, maybe even two, if I go back to that time, San Diego and other areas. But I'll take the listeners through your personal background. And even your perhaps your path, obviously, to becoming an ophthalmologist and surgeon, and then we'll get into how you got to OcuTerra.
Sure, pleasure, Paul. Thanks. I've had the great pleasure of knowing you for about 20 years, actually, maybe more years, if you care to admit. But I'm, as you know, I'm a board certified ophthalmologist. Practiced for about 20 years in the greater San Diego area in various capacities. Was with the U.S. Navy for a number of years. Actually went to Georgetown Medical School on a Navy scholarship. I owed them 4 years, ended up staying for 21 because of all the wonderful opportunities and the teams I had a chance to associate with, and the great work we did there. Also worked a little bit on the industry side with TLC, and that's where I think I met you for the first time, doing some podium presentations for MDs and ODs collaboratively. It was a wonderful experience. But was with the Navy for about 20 years, retired in 2011. And actually opened my own private practice in San Diego, was in that capacity for a couple of years, and then was honored by my good friend Jim Mazo to consider leaving clinical practice and joining him as his inaugural chief medical officer with Abbott Medical Optics. And at that time, it was the right thing for me to do from a career development perspective, and was honored by his request to be considered. So left my clinical practice in 2013, one of the most difficult professional decisions I had to make because I love seeing patients, something I really enjoyed doing and did a lot of for a number of years. But joined Abbott Medical Optics as the chief medical officer, the inaugural CMO there, built a global medical affairs division, as well as supported the development teams there at AMO in launching over 30 products around the world. And at that time, it was a tremendous opportunity for me to really see global medicine, how it was practiced around the world, and launch products from an insider's perspective. because, as you well know, Paul, we don't really know what we know as an external collaborator and a consultant. But when you get in the trenches of a company, you really understand the processes, the rigorous processes that are undertaken in the development, the regulatory, the launch, commercialization phases. And I was honored to join the company and do that for about 4.5 years.
I want to get into, and remind you, I'll get back to that question on how to be able to learn that whole other aspect, but keep going. I want to hear more.
I was just going to say I transitioned from AMO when they joined Johnson & Johnson, and I joined Novartis Pharmaceuticals in the development phase and medical affairs phase on the pharmaceutical side. And was privileged to be with that team for about 3 years as we launched an innovative technology for the treatment of neovascular AMD. So I've gone from the device side to the pharma side. I've gone from the front of the eye to the back of the eye. And we know some of the issues that the brolucizumab team has undergone in terms of understanding what the safety signals are and how to treat patients who ultimately develop some side effects from brolucizumab. But left that organization earlier this year and was honored to be considered by Kerrie Brady and the team at OcuTerra to join her and be the chief medical officer to help OcuTerra Therapeutics develop OTT-166. A tremendous innovative option for the treatment of neovascular AMD, diabetic macular edema, a host of retinal diseases that we're currently evaluating and developing. And Paul, you're a part of that process as well. We're honored to have you on our team as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to get into that and then how the company was formed. But let me start with Kerrie on this. Kerrie, how's the transition from going from a background in pharma, and you were a pharmacist for a period of time, is that right?
Actually, I went straight into the industry.
Good for you. You knew coming out of it, this is what you want to do. So that's a great way to paraphrase it. Yeah. So how do you then approach the whole understanding of that business side of that leadership? Is it intuitive? Did you have to do, of course, you go through an MBA. What were your steps to going from having gone through a PharmD program, which is a pretty intensive program, knowing you're an entrepreneur, knowing that was a drive? So obviously there's some intuitive level there, but how'd you learn or picked up the skills to then get to the level where you're actually running a startup company?
Many years, lots of scar tissue and lots of support and help along the way. And, I wish I could say, yes, there was this grand plan and I was going to do this and this and that. And to be honest, no. I sort of followed what I was interested in doing and opportunities that came along, and it sort of meandered around and, ended up here. I think I can tell the story in retrospect now and make it seem like a whole lot of sense. And I had a big grand plan, but it wasn't the case. And I think it's maintaining the curiosity, but also the courage to step out of your comfort zone. When I'm telling the story in reverse, when I actually did my pharmacy trainee year in the industry. I negotiated with the authorities back in Australia to allow me to do that. And my friends say, "You're crazy. No one goes into the industry." But it's like I had done a studentship, a summer internship in the industry. And, wow, this is so exciting. This is what I want to do. And then I joined in a regulatory affairs role and was helpful getting some products approved and negotiating some things. And there was an opportunity for a product management position in the company. No one goes from regulatory affairs to product management. You're crazy. It's like, oh, I didn't know, but it sounded interesting, so I did it. Nearly killed me. It was a deep learning curve. And, an example of great advice is I went to our general manager and I said, I think I need to do a master's degree in marketing because there's a lot I need to know here. He said, no, you don't, Kerrie. People do a master's degree in marketing to get the job you've got now. You need to do an MBA for the next job that you get. And he was true. He was right. So I did an MBA and that opened my eyes. I've always have had a passion and a talent for science, but who knew? Well, it's not too bad at business either. And then when I came out of the MBA program, I then moved over to the biotech side of the equation, and again, taking a risk. There was what we would call now a translational incubator program that needed someone come in and run it. It's like, sure, why not? 2 years into that, oh my God, what have I done? And then I survived 7 years. And along the way, actually, I learned, and I had to learn why, a vector is more than just an insect that carries disease. We had a lot of genetic engineering technologies, expression vectors. I went and did a master's in biopharmaceuticals, so now I know a little bit more about vectors. So it's that combination: stretch, experience, learn, do some extra training along the way, and Except that there's actually a lot of help out there. There's a lot of people who really want to help you succeed and go forward and listen and engage with them. I think that's what it took for me.
I love it. I love the courage is a great statement. I think people don't realize they have it in them. They can do. And there are so many people willing to help if you just ask and you're sincere. Yeah. And I think people don't really, kind of an honor to be asked to help and contribute. That was a great insight. And I love the stretch component too. David, your pathway, obviously, in a surgeon with the Navy, very well respected, a lot of patient base as well. The transition into CMO. Was there difficulties in that from the education standpoint of also then knowing the business aspect, or were you able to just apply all the medical knowledge and your insights and kind of run with it?
Yeah, great question, Paul. Thanks. I was privileged to be in the position that I was in the Navy for about 10 years, working alongside Steve Shellhorn for a number of years. And then when he retired around 2006, actually was able to lead the refractive surgery research team for about 5 years prior to my retirement. That process really allowed me to collaborate with industry, really to understand the investigative process, the development process, the intricacies that go into writing a protocol, getting it approved by an IRB, getting the funding. Because in the Navy, we still had to go through a funding process, reporting to 2- and 3-star admirals and generals to get the funding we needed to do those studies. So not dissimilar to what Kerrie does for getting the funding that we needed for OcuTerra. But that whole process of development, collaboration with industry partners, and understanding that process was something I think that served me well when I was invited to make the transition out of clinical practice. As I said, it was the most difficult decision I've had to make in my professional career, because I had to give up clinical practice in order to join the medical optics team. In that regard, take on additional levels of responsibility and opportunities that I wasn't able to be afforded when I was in my clinical practice. So it was a trade-off for sure. But talking about the business acumen and the research acumen that I carried from my time with the Navy into industry was something that served me well, I think, as CMO. I certainly had a lot to learn, and I was continue to be thankful to my industry colleagues when I joined AMO to bring me along in understanding the business from that internal perspective. Because as I said earlier, it's really what we don't know as external collaborators that we find out once we join a company, and the processes, the rigor that goes into developing a product, getting it approved, getting it ready for launch, and launching with excellence. That whole process you really take on when you're inside the company itself. And I was privileged to be in the position I was in to support those functions all the way through, from development through commercialization as CMO for AMO, and my ultimate follow-on positions currently, and that's exactly what we're doing at OcuTerra.
That's great. Speaking of OcuTerra, Kerrie, tell us how the company came about, as far as conception and where your involvement came in, at what level, and then David, I'll have you take us through current product and where we're at in terms of the FDA progress. Kerrie?
Sure. So OcuTerra, I would describe as a refocusing, a recapitalization, and a reinvigoration of the company. And we have the benefit of a fantastic lead program that already has clinical data with a wonderful molecule and very promising way ahead. Not surprisingly, many companies struggle, typically called like the valley of death, when you're trying to get the funding to move from the phase 1 into phase 2. And so the prior company name was Cyflor, based on scientific fluorination technologies. And it was more a platform company using the ability to selectively fluorinate within a molecule to either dial in desired characteristics, such as in the case of OTT-166, able to dial in biophysical chemical profile, so the lipid solubility, the charge, etc., to optimize it to transfer through the ocular tissues to get to the retina with that. Other ways you can use selective fluorinations to dial out properties. So there are other examples in other areas of maybe a particular metabolic pathway that may end up being toxic, etc. So from a platform company point of view, Cyflor. So the OTT-166 molecule is the most advanced and the most promising. So the strategy was decided to focus down in on that molecule and take the program forward, leaving the sort of non-strategic assets to find another home. And that is also reflected in the change of the name to OcuTerra. We changed that about a year ago to reflect our now focus and future in the ophthalmology area. So we also had to go through recapitalizing and refinancing the company, to take it to the next stage. We're delighted to be able to announce that we've completed our Series B funding raise, $35 million funding, which is over the minimum. We went into our over allotment, reflective of the enthusiasm for this technology, the promise and the approach. And so now we're set to move forward with the start of our phase 2 program in the first half of next year.
That's very exciting. And congratulations on not only funding it to that level, but overfunding it. It's very exciting, but I can see why too. It's a wonderful platform, very exciting capabilities, and of course, topical agents compared to injections. It just makes us realize what potential could be here. David, can you tell us a little bit through where we are now as far as the company's process through the FDA pathway, what stage you're in, and what you're anticipating, what you may have learned in the previous stage about the drug candidate, OTT-166?
Sure. Thanks, Paul. Great question. And something that I was certainly intrigued about when I was invited to be considered as Kerrie's Chief Medical Officer. They granted me access to some of the clinical data, the preclinical data that I had a chance to review, and I was, to say the least, incredibly impressed with the rigor that the company, SciFluor Life Sciences and OcuTerra, has gone through to get us to the stage we're in now. I really feel like I'm standing on the shoulder of those giants here based in Boston in terms of getting where we are today, with the promise, as you rightfully pointed out, of developing a topical therapy for retinal diseases. I mean, yes, it's been tried in the past, and I can take you through some of those challenges that other companies may have had in the past. But the preclinical data that we have, that SciFluor Life Sciences has handed off to us at OcuTerra, really shows that through the fluorination process and the other biophysical chemical processes that Kerrie's taking you through, has taken the OTT compound, OTT-166 compound, and really has proven that it can be delivered topically and gets to the area of regard, i.e. the retinal tissues, through an outside-in mechanism, through a transconjunctival, transscleral, choroid into the retina approach, as opposed to going straight through the cornea into the eye. We know that from the preclinical distribution studies that have been done, showing that the concentration of OTT-166 in the sclera and in the choroid are about 200 times higher than the IC50 required for therapeutic effect, versus the vitreous and the aqueous, where it's significantly lower than that. So it really proves to me that it's working from an outside-in mechanism, a transconjunctival, transscleral approach, which is important for our mechanism of action as a topical therapy, of course. The other preclinical work that's been done in various models of neovascularization and exudation show that it has strong biological activity in the preclinical models to date. So that really put us in a good position to go into phase 1 studies that SciFluor did several years ago in 2 different disease models, 2 different disease states, neovascular AMD, as well as diabetic retinopathy / diabetic macular edema. And those 2 studies were completed several years ago. They've been presented in various forums, and we're now readying those manuscripts for peer-reviewed publication. But it really showed to me, number one, first and foremost, in the phase 1 study, we met the primary endpoint, which was safety and tolerability. In both of those disease models, there was no issues with tolerability or safety whatsoever. So, point number 1, that was proven. But the nice to have in a phase 1, as you know, Paul, is that the evidence of biological activity or biological effect was also seen in both of these disease models, where we saw significant levels of reduction in the central retinal thickness and in the OCT morphologies in these diabetic macular edema patients. And that was shown to us and proven to us or elucidated to us by retina specialists that we had on under advisors at the time these studies were done. So with those 2 studies under our belt, we then, and the funding now clearly secured, we are confident in moving into phase 2 clinical trials in diabetic retinopathy with OTT-166. We've been collaborating with the FDA, as you would assume we have. There are no unanswered questions to date, and we are ready to start dosing patients in our phase 2 study early next year. We will design a study. We've developed a study that will enroll about 200 patients. We will be looking at diabetic retinopathy in terms of patients who have moderately severe to severe nonproliferative diabetic retinopathy, as well as mild PDR. So the 47s, 53s, and 61s on the DRSS scale, if you want to quantify it. And we are quantifying it for regulatory endpoints, of course. We're looking for a two or more step reduction in the DRSS score as a primary endpoint at 24 weeks compared to baseline in these patients who will be treated with OTT-166. And it will be a randomized controlled clinical trial, masked, of course, and it will be comparing the efficacy of OTT-166 compared to vehicle control. So we're very excited about the protocol. We have the primary endpoint that's been determined by other studies, so it's well recognized from regulatory pathway perspective. We're also looking at a host of key secondary endpoints. And what I'm also very excited about is some of our exploratory image-based endpoints as well, looking at things like OCT angiography, which you are aware is maybe redefining how we actually define what diabetic retinopathy is. The DRSS score was created over 30 years ago with color fundus photos. We're using antiquated technology to diagnose and follow a disease right now. We have great things like OCT angiography, which we'll be able to implement more effectively to follow patients with diabetic retinopathy in the future. And we're using those as exploratory endpoints in our phase 2 study.
Very exciting, amazing seeing that, and that makes a lot of sense, and it's also impressive. The FDA has been impressive in their understanding of these disease states, and as things advance, and we've new ways of being able to really decipher the effect and perfusion, other factors, and of course diabetic retinopathy along their scale. So that's great to hear, and I think it'll just give us much more valuable information when the time comes for a topical agent. But I could see the future where you would, use this type of an agent first, and so you get that reduction potentially in diabetic retinopathy, and perhaps different conditions like DME, et cetera, and see if we can move things back, and then having all fallback positions. But that's certainly much more in the future. But it's exciting to think about the potential given the way that you described it and what came out. Did anything surprise you in the preliminary trial? So if the phase 1, as far as it was kind of along what you expected, or anything from specific that stood out?
Sure. Well, I was reassured that, number one, we met the primary endpoint of safety and tolerability, no question about it. So that gives me confidence from a safety perspective in moving into phase 2, looking at exposing many more patients to this product, and also the level of biological activity that was seen in 2 different disease states was something that was reassuring to me as well. So we know we're getting a topical therapy to the tissue of regard. We're doing it with a high degree of effectiveness, and we're doing it safely. So really, you can't ask for more than that from a phase 1 to a phase 2 progression. So I think we're very well suited from a safety and tolerability and an efficacy perspective in moving into phase 2.
That's exciting. So Kerrie, you've worked with this agent some time now, this candidate, and kind of understanding it and the novelty of it really in terms of that. So pretty much everything is falling into what you expected, and what made the application seem so appropriate for the field of ophthalmology?
Sure. Yes, things are falling into line. I'd say even better than expected with that. I'm really thrilled with how things are developing out. The molecule or the profile of OTT-166, to me, it just so clearly matches the needs, the unmet need of the diabetic retinopathy patient, particularly those with moderately severe to severe nonproliferative diabetic retinopathy, who for the current standard of care is, for all intents and purposes, active surveillance or watch and wait. We know that there are approved intravitreal products, but they're not being taken up. The risk benefit, input benefit of regular IVTs doesn't necessarily play out as strongly in this patient population. And so the ability to have a non-invasive treatment for these patients to improve their retinal health, offer the opportunity to delay or prevent the progression of their disease, particularly to the sight-threatening complications such as diabetic macular edema, in a non-invasive way is very clear for us. And certainly, the feedback that we've had in testing and speaking with, thought leaders in the space, endorses that this is we see an ideal entry point that meets a real unmet need in this particular patient group.
Excellent. Last question. I'll start with David, and then we'll finish with Kerrie. But do you have advice for any, in your case, David, physicians that are listeners that have aspirations of being involved in industry? Kind of like what you learned along the way, challenges, processes, and just your recommendation.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. It's a great question. It's something that's intrigued me throughout my professional journey, and if others are equally intrigued, I'm happy to have a conversation with them. But I would say first and foremost, really understand the opportunity that you're requesting to get yourself into. You almost be careful what you ask for, because things are different. As an external contributor, collaborator, consultant, which I was for many years, was privileged to be in that role. It's different in that external capacity, even though you're intimately involved in these processes, these development processes and presentation processes, and it's very enjoyable. It's different when you're on the inside and you're really having to undergo the rigor, as I said, of the development, the regulatory, the approval, and the launch phase. It's a little bit different. So really, I would say the first and foremost, to really understand that process from an internal perspective before you make the jump and taking on a full-time role. The other aspect is make sure you enjoy what you're doing in terms of getting into that process, because if you're having to give up, any or all of being a practitioner, which many of us are or have been for a number of years, you really have to give up a considerable amount of that, if not give it up 100%, depending on the company you're asked to join. I'll say case in point for me, Abbott Medical Optics Abbott Laboratories in general require all their medical officers not to have primary responsibility for patient care in any way, shape, or form, not even as a volunteer. So I had to make that, I had to give that acquiescence, if you will. I had to give up my clinical practice in order to join AMO. So the risk reward for an individual has to be there to make that sacrifice in giving up what we've enjoyed doing for a number of years. So just having an understanding of what that specific company you're looking to join has as a requirement, and making sure you're on board with that, and then make the transition with eyes wide open. Run toward an opportunity, not away from something you're afraid of. Don't join a company because you're tired of reimbursement hassles. It's probably the wrong reason to join a company. But if you're doing it for the right reasons, it's a very enjoyable, very rewarding experience.
That's terrific, inspirational answer. And Kerrie, I know there's probably a lot of listeners too have taken a certain path to begin with. In your case, going through the PharmD, but realized they were really, their passion was that entrepreneurial approach. What would be your advice for people with those aspirations to look to achieving, maybe not your level, but, some level of that exciting pathway as you're doing?
Oh, there is so many opportunities to help aspiring entrepreneurs. That's one of the reasons that, I've made the US my home. There's, the support. And it's not just financial and infrastructure, it's the cultural support too, of celebrating entrepreneurs and trying. Don't be afraid to fail going forward. Octane, has a great program for, particularly in ophthalmology area. With that, there are many groups throughout the system. I actually am a mentor at MIT for, their startup companies. There's a lot of things that you can tap into. And, reach out and talk to people, be part of the community, and don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to try. If you don't like it, fine. Try something else. One thing, particularly for our academic colleagues, I'll put out there in my prior companies, I've encouraged, and we call them scientists in residence. Consider in your sabbatical, taking a sabbatical to come and work in-house in a biotech company. It's a great opportunity for exchange of ideas and experience, and it's a nice win-win. As Dave was saying, you sort of dip your toe into the water, and I'm sure with colleagues in private practice, there might be some ways to work out something that small companies always need help with things, and maybe there's a way to just try before you buy or try before you jump in approach. But most of all, just if it's something you really want to do, just do it. Just do it.
Great advice. You guys are terrific guests. I mean, all kinds of insights you shared so wonderfully and openly, and I'm very excited about the company, OcuTerra, your drug candidate, OTT-166. Obviously, it bodes well given the team leading it. So that's a wonderful sign in of itself. But Dr. Tanzer, Kerrie Brady, thank you both so much for this wonderful interview. Wish you continued success and look forward to seeing you in person, hopefully again soon.
Thank you.
Pleasure, Paul. Thank you.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the OIS podcast. Listen in next week to find out the latest eye care innovations from leaders in ophthalmology. Subscribe to our iTunes channel so you don't miss an episode. Got a story of your own to tell? Apply to be a guest at OIS.net.